Great. So again, thank you for joining our webinar today for our topic, Fostering Connection with your LGBTQ2+ youth, presented by Dr. Nicholas Linares. Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada offers quarterly webinars that provide valuable insights and information to key adult caregivers, including teachers, early childhood educators, nurses, and parents and caregivers who work with and live with babies, school-aged children, and youth. You can check out our website at www.strongmindsstrongkids.org for more information. Just going to share my screen now. Hopefully everyone can see that. And before we get started, I'd just like to do a brief land acknowledgement. So our head office is located on sacred land that has been a site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat, and is now home to many diverse peoples. We acknowledge that the City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We acknowledge these nations and any other recorded or unrecorded First Peoples who care for the land as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land named Takaranto, where the trees meet the water, or the gathering place. As settlers, we entered into an agreement to share this land equitably. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. We are grateful for the opportunity to work with communities on this territory. And I'd also like to read just a very brief passage from the Anishinaabe author, Richard Wagamese, on the topic of listening and fostering connection, which is our topic today. So this author says, I want to listen deeply enough that I hear everything and nothing at the same time, and am made more by the enduring quality of my silence. I want to question deeply enough that I am made more, not by the answers so much as my desire to continue asking questions. I want to speak deeply enough that I am made more by the articulation of my truth, shifting into the day's shape. In this way, listening, pondering, and sharing become my connection to the oneness of life, and there's no longer any part of me in exile. So again, I thought that spoke really well to like the connecting topic when we're talking about connecting with our youth today. Okay. And I'm just going to show a brief video presentation about some of our Strong Minds, Strong Kids resources.
Hello, and welcome to Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada Wellness Webinar Series. We're delighted you've decided to join us today. At Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada, we believe that prevention is the intervention needed. We can't wait until our kids suffer from a mental illness. That is why we promote mental well-being in kids before mental health issues begin. We are a registered charity with over 45 years of experience effectively nurturing resilience in kids with the use of psychological science. Our programs span the developmental stages of kids, starting as early as birth. Make the Connection is our attachment-based program that is aimed to improve parent-child relationships during the first 3 years. A secure attachment in the early years is proven to build the foundation for long-term healthy development. Make the Connection is designed to help parents and caregivers develop that secure attachment with their young ones. For over 20 years, Strong Minds, Strong Kids has been training educators and child-serving professionals in our resilience building programs. Kids have stress too, and stress lessons. From pre-kindergarten to grade 12, these programs help children and youth become healthier and more resilient by teaching them how to identify and manage their stress. Each program is linked to curriculum and offers psychologically sound strategies and tools that will help children and youth develop resilience and positive coping skills that will help them manage life's inevitable ups and downs. A critical pillar in nurturing resilience in children and youth is ensuring there is a supportive, caring adult in their life. We developed stressstrategies.ca, which is an interactive tool designed to help adults identify and manage their stress. The tool provides a variety of research-backed stress management strategies and guides you through questions which will lead you to the development of your own personalized stress management plan. Please go to stressstrategies.ca to create your action plan today. And don't forget to visit our website, www.strongmindstrongkids.org, to learn more about our Make the Connection e-learning course, our resilience building training programs and facilitation guides. You'll find our library of free psychology-based webinars in a variety of booklets and tip sheets that will help you support children and youth in building the strongest foundation for mental health.
Okay, let me try to skip to the next slide. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulties. There we go. All right, so here you see some of our guides that we were talking about. And before I introduce Dr. Linares, I just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know that Strong Minds, Strong Kids has recently had a review done on all of our program guides and training to ensure our resources are inclusive and reflective of the diverse experiences of the children and youth we are supporting. We have worked diligently with equity, diversity, and inclusivity partners, such as Mosaic Institute, to accomplish this in 2022, which is why we are so pleased to bring this webinar to you today about fostering connection with your LGBTQ2+ youth in a spirit of equity, diversity, and inclusivity. Our latest Kids Have Stress 2 and Stress Lessons program guides can be ordered directly from our website, strongmindsstrongkids.org. All right, so without further ado, who you all came to see. So Dr. Nicolas Linares is a registered pediatric psychologist with the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, offering services to the Ottawa-Gatineau region in both official languages and Spanish. He completed a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with a specialization in neuroscience and his PhD in clinical psychology with a specialization in neuroscience at the University of Ottawa. During his PhD, he specialized in child, adolescent, and family services. He completed his training in different hospitals, school board and community centers in clinical psychology, school psychology, and clinical neuropsychology. He completed his pre-doctoral internship at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and postdoctoral training in clinical neuropsychology at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. He currently splits his time between the public and private sectors while teaching at the University of Ottawa. He provides intervention services for anxiety and mood disorders, suicidality, LGBTQ+ issues, and male men's sexuality and toxic masculinity. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Linares.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a lot on our plate, so I will make sure to keep track of the time. Just before we start, we already did the land acknowledgement, but since I'm here in Ottawa, I just want to take the time to acknowledge that I am in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The first part of the presentation is about language, and this is one of the questions that I get the more often from parents or educators is, why is language so important when I talk with my LGBTQ+ youth? As you might know, when you go over the internet and you're trying to find more information, there's a bunch of acronyms that you can use, and it can be quite confusing to know which ones should I be using to refer to the LGBTQ+ community. Technically, the last one, the one is in red, is the official international acronym that we use when we talk about the LGBT community. But at the end of the day, it's the language that we use with them. We just want to make sure that we are inclusive. And what I mean by that is I personally, when I meet with the families or the youth who are part of this community, I just let them know that I will be using LGBTQ plus just to shorten our conversations, because otherwise, imagine if I would say every single time that I want to refer to them with the second last LGBTQ2IPSAA, the conversations will would take so much time. So often I just let them know in advance why it is important for me to let them know that I'm using the shorter acronym, but I'm inclusive when I'm talking about this community. One perfect example of why language is so important before we get to that piece is a recent example that I heard from someone close to me was someone who identifies as being non-binary. And this person, one of their parents would say baby girl. And because this person is not binary, meaning that they don't identify as either male or female, men or women, for them, it was kind of a trigger. They didn't like that piece. But when their parent understood that piece, they started to say baby person. And this person just became extremely happy that the parent was able to understand that while baby girl, it is okay, it's just a term, it was a trigger for this person. So sometimes as adults, we're not used to these type of new terms, baby person. It seems odd, it seems silly. But I think it's this, when we think about the language that we use about the LGBTQ community, there's a lot of words that we weren't comfortable using before, and now we are. So it's the same thing. Baby person might sound strange now, but in a couple of years, it might just be part of our language. One of the pieces that that it's quite confusing for adults and even myself, working with youth who are part of the LGBTQ community, is all the differences in terms of gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, sexual orientation, sexual attraction, and romantic attraction. While you might think that all these terms might mean the same thing, actually they are not. So they're not interrelated, they're interconnected, meaning that these terms might affect the other one, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it means the same thing. So let's get into a little bit more on the details about this one. The genderbread person. I think this is one of the best images that we can use when we are speaking with our youth to help them understand who they are, or also helping them find these answers. But also as adults, it's easier for us to understand when we have this type of visual aid. First, when we talk about gender identity, this is really what we refer about how do you think about yourself? How do you make sense of who you are inside of you? So what gender identity, of course, it is influenced by our hormones and our environment. So it might be similar to biological sex, but it's different because biological sex is really what we have in our pants, what we look like from the outside, but gender identity is how we feel in the inside. Now we have gender expression. When we talk about gender expression, is how you want to express yourself in your daily life. So sometimes we might see someone who looks like a man, but it's actually dressed like a woman, or someone who looks like a woman, but it's dressed like men. That's how they want to be, that's how they want to express themselves. Or we can see, for example, youth who identify themselves as being men, but they're wearing nail polish because they just feel that it's cool wearing nail polish. So that's the gender expression. It doesn't mean that they're gay, doesn't mean they're transgender. It just means that they want to express themselves in the way that makes them feel comfortable. When we talk about biological sex, it's really that piece of what do you look like physically, the hormones that you have inside of you, the chromosomes that you possess. Often, one of the misconceptions that I hear from adults is that in terms of biological sex, we only have male or female. So chromosomes XY for males and it's X for females. But actually, it's more complicated than that, because we know that there are people who will be born with triple X, or two X's and one Y, or two Y's and one X, or just X and no other chromosome. So these people don't fall in the category of either being females and males. They fall into their own category. So the way that they're going to express themselves, or the way that they want to identify themselves, will be different from the typical presentation that we have. So this is one of the pieces that it's often misunderstood, that biological sex, it's not only male and females, it's more complicated than that. In terms of sexual orientation, I would say this is the one that we all know the most, in terms of this is how you're attracted to the person physically, emotionally, spiritually. This is who you want to be with. So this is where we're going to talk about being either gay, bisexual, lesbian. So this is who are you attracted to. And then when we get into a little bit more the nuances, is the sexual attraction and romantic attraction. So to give you a concrete example, I work with a youth who he was identified as being male. He was heterosexual, but in his daily life, he was only attracted to girls of his age. In terms of romantic attraction, he only wanted to be with girls, but he was sexually attracted to both boys and girls. So in terms of having an intimate relationship, he didn't really mind being with boys or girls, but he was more interested from a romantic perspective to only be with girls. So this is when it can be confusing as adults, because you might think, oh, my child is heterosexual, but why is he having intimate relationships with boys and girls if he's heterosexual? That's when the nuances are in here. And that's why it can be confusing for us as adults, because we tend to think that being heterosexual means that we're only attracted to people from the other sex, other gender, but actually can be a little bit more, not complicated, but nuanced.
Dr. Linares,
Yes.
Can we ask a question? We have a question from Claudia, just as an aside. That's okay?
Of course.
So Claudia's asking, can the term queer be used instead of LGBTQ, like the queer community instead of the LGBTQ community?
That's an excellent question. I would say that it's not really a debate from the LGBTQ community, because identifying yourself as being queer, it's really its own different identification. It just means that you're different from the heteronormative presentation. So if you address someone as being queer, but they, for example, they're transgender, they're not binary, they're not going to necessarily, they might correct you, because being queer, it's very different from being gay or lesbian. So that's why we prefer to use the term LGBTQ+ instead of queer, because it's a distinctive definition of those two terms. But that's a really great question, because that's one of the questions that I often have is queer the same thing as LGBTQ? No, it's not. So why am I presenting you all this information in terms of differences in gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, sexual orientation, sexual attraction, and romantic attraction? It's because things are changing. Generations are different. A concrete example of this is how younger generations are being attracted more by both sexes. So because we're providing a secure environment to the younger generations, they're really no longer, but they're no longer afraid to show who they are, because they know they have adults who will support them. They will have families who will support them. So what we're seeing, and what you're seeing basically on the screen, is compared to baby boomers and Gen Z. So basically the students who are right now in high school, there's a huge difference. If you see here, it's only 1 out of 2 of Gen Z students or youth who are attracted to the opposite sex, while it's almost 8 out of 10 baby boomers who are only attracted to the opposite sex. So things are changing. And as adults working with this generation, the younger generations, it's important for us to know those differences. The alpha generation, so the generation that are currently, for example, right now in elementary school, I wouldn't be surprised when we will have that data later on in a couple of years, that they might have similar percentage as the Gen Z, or it will actually be lower, because we're simply providing that environment to these individuals to be who they want to be without having those consequences necessarily of being ostracized or being told that they should be behaving or they should be wearing some certain clothes. So all this to say, that's why it's important, because we cannot copy what you used to be as a teenager to what teenagers are experiencing right now. And even myself, I still get surprised. As it was presented, I work in the public sector, and specifically in a school board here in Ottawa. And when I go in my schools, I work in high schools. Sometimes I will see males, they look like males, but they're wearing typical female clothes. Or I will see female students who are wearing typical male clothes. And it's just different, because when I was in high school, you will get teased if you would wear those type of clothing, but it's not happening at the same level as before. So that's why it's important to have this vocabulary. But accepting these students doesn't mean that they don't experience discrimination. So in the daily life of an LGBTQ plus individuals, they do experience microaggressions. They do experience discrimination. And unfortunately, it does impact them. We tend to think that microaggressions are not as impactful of being experiencing racism or being discriminated, but actually the accumulation of all these microaggressions can lead to mental health problems. So we know, for example, that if someone continues to experience microaggressions as LGBTQ plus individuals compared to non-LGBTQ youth, there's a significant increase for anxiety, for depression, for self-harm, for suicidality. So research really shows clearly that being part of the LGBTQ community, whether when we're young or adults, we have a higher levels of prevalence of these different mental health problems. In fact, we also found, for example, in therapy, unfortunately, sometimes when clients will disclose specific information to their therapist, there's a study done by Owen et al. Who found that close to 80% of individuals part of the LGBTQ community, that the experiences, their microaggressions that were sharing to their therapist, they were ignored. So you are in a very specific space where you should feel safe. You should feel that you can talk about yourself without feeling discriminated or feeling that your therapist will acknowledge those emotions. Yet almost 80% of them reported that they feel that those experiences are ignored by therapists. And it's important as therapists, as psychologists, myself, to acknowledge those differences. And I'm not perfect. I've made those mistakes as well, but I address them right away. I remember, for example, providing services to a transgender male student, and I misgendered them. After, I think I had 15 sessions, I accidentally misgendered them. I took the time to pause our therapy session and apologize to this youth, because while it might seem silly that, oh, it's just a mistake, it's still some sort of microaggression, because I'm not taking the time to think about how just using the wrong pronouns can impact my youth. So all this to say that it is okay to make those mistakes as adults when you're working with your LGBTQ plus youth, but it's also important that if you make a mistake or you realize that you might have say something that could have been interpreted different by your youth, take the time to stop and just let them know that unfortunately you made a mistake, but it wasn't your intention. That will actually strengthen the relationship with your youth instead of just letting it go. LGBTQ plus individuals, they also experience what we call micro assaults or micro invalidations. When we talk about micro assaults, is either some sort of verbal or non-verbal insults of behavior that will be put towards them. So that can be called from different names or not, or being called out at school or in any situation. And micro invalidations is just that piece of letting them know that actually their experience is not valid, that they're over exaggerating, for example.
Question, Dr. Linares?
Yes, no problem.
We just have a question here from Suzanne, just asking about why are we using the term micro with all of these terms? Thank you.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I agree with the question that why are we using micro? It's simply because that's how far research has done its work. There is debate in the research and clinical community that these are no micro assaults. These are not micro invalidations. They're actually invalidations. There are assaults. So I agree with the question that why are we calling this micro aggressions or assaults? My personal opinion is that these are not micro assaults or invalidations. These are verbal or non-verbal assaults or invalidations that these individuals experience. Nevertheless, research is not there yet, but the debate that clinicians and researchers are having right now, I feel that it's moving towards that. It was the same thing before. I think that it's fair to say that before that BLM movement happened, we used to call that microaggressions for people of colors. Today, we are acknowledging that we're not really talking about microaggressions. We're talking about racism or discrimination. So I think that the LGBTQ movement is moving towards that, that line as well of stop calling this micro, but acknowledging that it's actually discrimination. So what do we do with all this information or how we can help them? That's the second piece of the presentation is how do you know that you're the right person to have this conversation? One of the key factors that I explain to educators, to teachers when I work with them in schools is the difference between telling them that you're providing a safe environment versus confidentiality. Confidentiality really meaning from the eyes of the law, as a psychologist means that I cannot share any information without having my patient's permission. Lawyers have that as well as in terms of being able to provide confidentiality. But as teachers, as educators, you're not able to provide that piece. You're able to provide a safe environment. So that's the difference when you have working with a youth is letting them know that you will be providing a safe environment and not confidentiality, because if you say to them that you're providing confidentiality, that could cause more problems later on if you actually need to disclose some information to the parent or for their safety, for example. In terms of the environment, having these conversations, we never know when it's going to happen. And it's often out of the blue. We never know when a youth would just come to your office and just start talking to you about what's going on in their life. But if you notice that you have a youth who stops you in the hallway and starts talking to you about this, as adult, it's important that we realize that, oh, even though probably this is the moment that you want to have this conversation, let's go to another room where we can sit and talk about this. So that will also enhance that respect of confidentiality for them. It will show them that you respect the information that are sharing to you, and you want to be supportive with them because you know that they are going to some different difficult times, or they're struggling with the issues of being part of the LGBT community. The third piece that I think it's important for educators and parents is being aware of your own biases. We all have biases. As psychologists, we have our own biases, but we learn to work around them so we can provide the best care to our patients, to our clients. you not being trained as a psychologist, it can be a little bit more difficult of being aware of those biases, but it's important that you realize that maybe you're not as open as you think. Maybe you have had experiences with the LGBT community that were negative for you, but it's okay. That's part of who you are as a person and growing. But it's also important that you realize those biases because they might manifest when you're trying to help these youth. In terms of being familiar with the LGBTQ language, there are so many terms. There's in every single day, every single week, I'm still learning new. 2 weeks ago, I was seeing a youth for a different, for anxiety. We ended up talking about them being part of the LGBT community, and they just started using a lingo or new words that I wasn't aware. It's okay. I stopped them and I just asked them, can you define these words for me? I'm not aware of that. And they're happy to do that. And actually that again will strengthen the relationship with your youth because they will realize that even though you're an adult, you're still able to recognize your own limits. And having them teaching you something, they will actually enjoy that part because they know that you're there to actually learn and be supportive with them. The other piece is also knowing your limits and level of comforts. Not every single time you will know what are your limits, but it's okay if you're having that conversation with them. If you stop them at some point, you say, you know what, Nicholas, I appreciate you sharing this information with me, but I don't think I'm the best person that can help you. I want to find someone who can help you go through what you're going through. And that's okay because you're letting them know that you have some sort of level of comfort, but you also want to make sure that they will have access to an adult or another person who will be able to help them.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Linares.
No problem.
But just to backtrack a little on point 3, are you aware of your own biases? We have a question from Tanya who says, do you have a tool to assess bias?
Oh, that's a great question. There is no specific tool to assess your biases in terms of the LGBT community that I'm aware of. It's more that that insight that you have about the LGBTQ community issues. And that goes a little bit with your level of comfort. And I would say that it also happens to me that sometimes some youth will want to have some more difficult conversations about being intimate with their partner. I'm aware that I'm a male psychologist, and that makes me uncomfortable a little bit, to be completely honest, because I feel that these conversations can be tricky. So in terms of biases, that's a way for you to think about it is just when you're reading about the LGBT community, it's being aware of taking that time in reflecting, like, is this something that I will be comfortable having a conversation with a 14-year-old? Would I be able to answer these questions? But that's a great question. I'm not aware there are self-tools for heterosexual cisgender people, but that's a way that I would tell parents or educators is when they're reading about the information, is asking themselves these questions. In terms of point 6, it's so important that you realize that they are the experts of their own experience. And that's often what I highlight to families or to youth is that I'm a professional, I'm an expert coming here with all the knowledge that I have about your difficulties. But at the end of the day, each single experience is individual. So even though you might be well versed in the LGBTQ lingo or you know a lot of information about them, about what's going on with the LGBT community, at the end of the day, every single one will have a different experience. For example, a white gay male student will have a total different experience as a Black gay male student. And that can be explained by different factors, racism and others. So it's important to not put everyone in the same basket. And at the end of the day, is being able to provide that active listening and validation. Sometimes they just want to have someone who will listen. So if you know that you're a good listener, sometimes it's just about you sitting on your chair, sipping coffee, and just having them talk for an hour. And it has happened to me that the youth just wanted to have a space to talk to someone. And I will always remember my first LGBTQ youth. I literally sat there for 50 minutes. I spoke 5 minutes. And at the end of the session, the youth was crying and just said to me, I've never had someone just listen to me. I didn't do much. I honestly didn't do much. I was just sitting and listening and trying to validate their emotions. But sometimes that's what they want. And even think about yourself. Sometimes you just want to have someone who will listen to you, and they don't need to come with solutions or anything. And that's a space that you can provide. It's active listening and validating their emotions. So how can we do that? So best practices one-on-one. So when you're working with LGBTQ+, there are 4 specific concepts that I took from this amazing researcher that provided a lot of information on how to provide best services to the LGBTQ+ community. So provide more information as the conversation deepens. The key factor in here is being able to realize that adolescence is a period of identity exploration and formation. So for some teens, they're actually exploring their gender, who they are. And sometimes that's the conversation that I have with parents, that sometimes they're a little bit frustrated because one year they're gay, the other year they're bisexual, then they're heterosexual, then they come back being gay. It does happen. That's not something that is common, but it does happen that as a teenager, they're trying to explore who they want to be. And as parents, at the end of the day, we're educator. It's just being there to provide the support that they need, or just being there to validate those emotions. The transition concept. So there are many transitions that a youth will go through when they realize that they're part of the LGBTQ community. The key factor that I always tell my youth patients and their families is that this is a marathon. It's not a race, specifically for our transgender youth, because when they realize that they're transgender or they're non-binary or other type of self-identification part of the LGBTQ community, they want to do things that are fast. And as adults, it can be quite overwhelming because you're aware that it takes time to make those changes. So often that's what I would explain, that we need to think that as a marathon, not a race, because yes, making those physical changes will have a positive impact on you, but you also have to make the changes in your own mind, meaning being psychologically ready. There are different transitions that a youth can go through depending on how they self-identify. So we can have what we call social transitions, medical transitions, and the caregiver concerns. So when I refer to social transitions, that's when the youth will start to identify itself by different pronouns or who they want to choose to show the world who they are. So that's one of the first key factors. So for example, for transgender in youth, that's when they might want to start dressing as the gender that is congruent with who they are. That's when they might start changing their name or changing their pronouns. So often this is the first piece that youth will go through, and parents and educators will be, this is the first piece that are surprised because this is coming for them sometimes out of nowhere. They weren't expecting this. Or for some parents, for some educators, it was clear that at some point this was going to happen. But this is a key factor because this is when youth start to feel accepted, if they feel that they can make this social transition. When we talk about medical transition, this is when we talk more about, for example, gender affirming hormones, fertility preservation, gender affirming surgeries, and legal transitions. Without getting too much into the details on each one, this is specifically for transgender individuals, but there's also other youth part of the LGBT community that they might want to go ahead with some of this information that I just told you, for example, gender affirming surgeries, that they want to make some changes either on the hormone level or on their body. It can be alarming, it can be overwhelming for parents. And for educators, they can see how that can impact their ability to be at school because they're just thinking about it. But what is important for you to remember as parents or educators is that in Canada, it's very different from what's happening in other countries or with our neighbors in the United States. Gender affirming surgeries are not as common for youth who are 14, 15, 16 as it is common in other countries. So while it can be overwhelming thinking about all these steps, remember that is a marathon. It's not a race. So these type of medical procedures will take time. And that's when you want to get that help. That can be a social worker, a psychotherapist, a psychologist who are part of the LGBTQ team who will be following these youth so you can have those questions answered to you. In terms of caregivers' concerns, this is one of the three more questions that we get often as psychologists, and this researcher did a beautiful job in summarizing our three biggest questions. Is my child old enough to make the decisions about their gender affirming care? What if my child regrets their decision? And will transitioning make my child's life more difficult? For the first question, is my child old enough to make these decisions? Yes and no. Of course, when they're children, you might say they want to be a girl, they want to be gay, or they want to be lesbian. It's okay. We just are listening to what they want. But when they become teenagers, that's when they start making their own decisions. And that's when we call something metacognition. Our ability to think about our thinking starts kicking in. So they're able to make these difficult these difficult decisions. So it's important for you to remember that where your child is, what are their maturity level, and again, being in contact with psychologists or social workers, psychotherapists, physicians who will help you answer those questions. One of the questions that often comes, specifically more for transgender youth, is what if my child regrets their decision later in life? It's a really good question, and it can be scary for parents, knowing that what if my child regrets their decision? One of the largest studies found that over 80% of transgender individuals did not regret their decision. They actually were happy in making those decisions. About 13% realized that they weren't feeling comfortable, so they discontinue their medical treatment because they realized that it wasn't for them. But at the end of the day, it was less than 1% of individuals who actually realized that they weren't comfortable with that medical transition and they want to go back. So it doesn't happen as often as we might think, because these youth are capable of making these decisions. They reflect about this constantly. They're thinking about this every single day. So it can be overwhelming hearing that you have a youth who is considering becoming transgender, or they want to be transgender, or they are transgender because their gender doesn't fit with what they're seeing. And that's why it's, again, important to remind that it's a marathon and not a race. And in terms of, will transitioning make my child's life more difficult? Will they be discriminated? It's a difficult question, but I cannot lie to you. It will happen. It happens. We're seeing in one of the first part of the presentation, they experience microaggressions. So yes, your child will experience some sort of discrimination because they're part of the LGBTQ community, but we're hopeful, right? We know that as we continue to see those differences, those societal changes that are happening, we're seeing there is more inclusivity. but I cannot lie to you. This happens and will happen to your youth. So that's why it's important to have a team surrounding you to have this discussion with your youth. And the last piece that I always stuck with parents is about those complex emotions that they might feel about having their youth part of the LGBT community, but also for those who are transgender, grief and loss. When we refer to grief and loss for the LGBT community or transgender individuals, it's not because they're grieving the loss of their child. It's more because they're grieving who they think their child was. So when you think about it, as humans, we like to be connected with others, especially our friends, our partners, our children. So when you realize that all your life you thought that you had a heterosexual boy, and then this boy, your boy, comes out as being one transgender, then it's a sudden change of who you thought that child was. So often what I offer to these families and what I encourage all families and parents to do is to have a space for them to talk about this. And I feel that we don't take that much time with parents to talk about this grief that they might experience. And it can be the same thing for educators in school. While you're following the same youth throughout middle school and high school, and you realize that one day from another, there were a boy on Wednesday and on Thursday, they're coming out transgender to you, it can be a loss for yourself as well, because while you thought that you knew this student, you didn't know that part of them. So it's okay for us adults to have these feelings, but those feelings have to be conveyed in a specific way, because we don't want our youth to feel responsible of our feelings, because that's how we feel. Ooh, sorry about that. So what can we do in terms of at school? What are the best practices that we can have at school? We know that it changes between provinces, but at the end of the day, if your province allows that in report cards, for example, if your youth wants to change their pronouns and their names, let's go ahead with that. And we know that when we start using those pronouns and names, it will enhance that communication to our youth that we care about them. We care that they can be who they want to be, and we will support them. When we talk about activities that are not gender, we're referring to being able to provide activities that are not typically for boys or girls. So we know that still competitive sports are separated between males and females. But what after all the competitions has happened, you open gender neutral teams. So anyone can play on the volleyball team, anyone can play in the hockey team, anyone can play in any of those teams. So that's what we want, that's what we mean, sorry, for activities that are not gender. It's trying to include everyone who doesn't fit the mold of male or female or boy or girl to being included in whatever activity they want to do. So that goes with physical education classes and extracurricular activities. Is just trying to provide as much as possible gender neutral activities. So one of the ways that we can do that is the policies and procedures. So for example, providing washrooms or change rooms that are safe for these individuals, especially for transgender individuals, since we know that transgender individuals, unfortunately, they experience so much more discrimination compared to cisgender students. So to give you a concrete example, in the washroom facilities where people change when they do their phys ed class, more than 50% of transgender youth will report being verbally harassed by others. More than 1 out of 5 students that are transgender will experience some sort of physical harassment, and about 1 out of 10 will experience a physical assault. So it does happen. We cannot pretend that it doesn't happen. It does. So having washrooms that are gender neutral for either transgender people, non-binary people, or anyone part of the LGBT community could provide that space for them to feel safe at school. And that goes, for example, with the dress code. Why are we still imposing a dress code for female students and male students? Why don't we just have a dress code for everyone? However you identify, you need to respect the same dress code. So that's another way. For example, if you have a student, and it does happen, who has the Willing-Turner syndrome, so that's a specific set of chromosomes that don't fit in the category of XX or XY, they can look more male, but they have physical features of being female. What if that student doesn't identify as either being male, but female, but because they look more male, they need to dress as a male? That will create anxiety, that will create stress, and it will have an impact on their mental health. So trying to have a dress code that is more universal rather than specific to boys and girls. And the last piece is an inclusive curriculum. So we know that the board that I work for is doing a fantastic job in terms of trying to provide that inclusive curriculum to the LGBT community, to our students of color, Indigenous students as well. So if your school is not already doing that, that could be another piece to let your students know that this is a safe space at school. You can be who you want to be, and we will accept you no matter what, because that's our job as adults, is to be there for our students and let them know that we will support them no matter who they are. So at the end of the day, what are the key messages? I provide a lot of information, but there is 4 specific things that I want you to remember for this presentation. Is that you don't know anything. And what I mean by that is science is going 1,000 miles an hour. There's always new terms coming. There's always new ways of understanding things. So you think that you have a good understanding of the LGBT community, we always learn new things. So it's okay to let them know that you're not aware, that you're not familiar with that. And as I said at the beginning, that would actually make your relationship stronger, because they will realize that you're human and you're allowed not to know everything, but you will help them to find the right information. Also, seek help from your colleagues. So for those who are educators, or even those who are professionals who don't have a lot of experience working with LGBTQ youth, it's okay to reach out to your colleagues who have an expertise or comfortable working with these youth. We're always happy to provide some readings or help you become a better ally when you're providing therapy. So it's okay to go and seek for that information. For parents, that means, for example, calling the self-help lines or going on the internet for more the general websites that can help you learn more about the LGBTQ experience and learn more about how to raise a child or a youth who are part of the LGBTQ community. Families and friends are key. I don't know if you remember that, but when you were a teenager, it was so important for us to have friends connecting to people, but also our families. And it's a delicate piece because it does happen sometimes where the inner circle, so that means your parents and your siblings, are all aware that you're part of the LGBT community, but it cannot go out of that. Like, family cannot know that. And I'm aware that there are different dynamics from the cultural perspective. I'm Latino, so I understand that piece. But at the same time, as parents, you have to be aware of that, where if you accept your child for who they are, but your child is not allowed to show that part of themselves when other family members come to your house or you go to their house, these children, these youth will internalize that piece that, oh, I'm only accepted with my parents and my siblings, but I'm not accepted with my whole family. Why do they need to hide me? I'm not a monster. So those are different dynamics that it's important for you to have these discussions with the health professionals who are helping you, or even as educators. Sometimes students will disclose this information, and it can be difficult having this conversation with either their parents or even with youth, because they feel that they're not accepted. So it's important that families and friends are there. We know that as long as friends and families provide that supportive environment, we are reducing the risk of anxiety, depression, suicidality, and self-harm. So family and friends are really a big key factor to maintain that relationship with our youth in a safe environment. If we all think about ourselves, we always want to be in an environment that we feel protected, we feel safe. It's the same thing for these students. They want to feel that they're in a place where they can talk about who they are, they can ask questions, and they're not going to feel judged or they're not going to feel invalidated. And that's pretty much summarizing the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Linares. That was like great information. I know that we have some folks here that were asking about wanting to get your slides and everything. So we'll talk about that a little later, but very, very good presentation. I just want to point out to everyone today that I did put a survey link in the chat. So your feedback on this webinar would be great. It helps us to plan for our future webinars. And on behalf of Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada, thank you again, Dr. Linares, for sharing your expertise with us today. And I hope our participants have learned some tips on how to foster even more connection with LGBTQ2+ youth. Thank you also to our webinar participants for joining us as well. We look forward again to your feedback on the webinar survey, and we hope you'll check out our new and revised Kids Have Stress Too and Stress Lessons guide. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.